God's break. But what will happen this year?
Well, the forecast is there. We hope that the flooding alerts have also been taken into consideration.
Yes.
Yeah, because as you're having heavy rainfall like this, not just only here in Abuja, but elsewhere around the country, the flood waters have to find their level at some point.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. You remember, Kieran, we had that conversation some weeks ago.
Yeah.
We had all the experts with us here in the studios as well as at our Kaduna Network Center.
And already the prone areas are known, so measures should be taken by now.
Yes, the alarm raised the other day was all the states, particularly within the low-level banks of River Niger, had been warned. Kebbi, Sokoto, Kwara, down up Kogi, all down to the Delta. However, there's need to raise alarm for those in the Benue Trough too. Adamawa, across to Taraba, to Benue, down to the Delta.
Okay. Now we have about 4 newspapers this morning, 4 papers this morning, and let's begin with the Daily Sun newspaper. Daily Sun newspaper. Just beside the nameplate on the right-hand side, we have again Oyegu Oshomole clash with the 2 riders. APC chair involved in anti-party activities, says Oyegu. I won't respond to Lucky. That's APC chairman. That story can be found on page 6. Now, the lead story this morning on Daily Sun newspaper, GOC under house arrest over stolen 400 million naira, with 2 riders to be moved to Abuja for further questioning. Army keeps mum. It's on page 8. Now, just below the photo story on the Daily Sun newspaper, we have insecurity. Alafi petitions Buhari with a rider. Balarabe Musa Falana call for rejig of security structure. The story is on pages 3 and 6. In Akwa Ibom Tribunal, INEC REC instructed me to cancel Akpabio's vote, says witness. It's also on page 415. Bauchi Assembly crisis, anxiety as reps conclude report with the rider APC OK's NAS intervention in Edo. It's on page 41. All right, Kingsley.
All right, we'll take a look now at the Blueprint newspaper. Blueprint, beside the nameplate, there's an earpiece there. NNPC announces 6.33 billion naira trade surplus for May. That's on page 33. BDC, that's Bureau de Change, excuse me, operators seek end to subsidy payment. That's also on page 33. BDC operators seek end to subsidy payment. And below the nameplate directly, kidnappers abduct 4 Turkish expatriates in Kwara and 8 workers still with Boko Haram 72 hours after. Another rider, APC chieftain, seeks death sentence for kidnappers. Now, below that, firm plans $25 million agric investment in Kaduna. And the lead story comes with a kicker. Edo and Bauchi Assembly crisis. APC NWC, that's National Working Committee, moves against Obaseki and Bala with 3 riders there, insists on fresh inauguration. Reps move unconstitutional, that's attributed to Ajulo, and leave Obaseki alone, Oyegun tells Oshomole. Details of that story can be found on page 6. And then 3,500 Fulani in various detentions in Nigeria. And that's attributed to Gafdan. Details of that story can be found on page 5. How Buhari averted humanitarian crisis in Northeast. And that story is on page 8. Bauchi records 3 animal diseases in 6 months. And Buhari and PDP bicker over $1 billion excess crude account fund. Details of that story can be found inside pages 8 and 32. Nigeria, blessed with visionaries and entrepreneurs. And that's according to the Israeli envoy, page 32. Bio.
Well, let's start with the story about the GOC. A GOC in one of the commands in the northern Nigeria is presently under house arrest. This is sequel to the theft of 400 million naira. You recall that last week there was this report about 4 soldiers, 2 lance corporals and 2 corporals, that were on official escort duty, escorting money from Sokoto through to somewhere in Jaji, and along the line, they disappeared with the money, and one of them had been arrested. And now, the GOC is said to be under interrogation, and for questioning to explain how the 400 million got stolen and disappeared. The other story relates to the All Progressive Congress. The All Progressive Congress has made pronouncement and says that Bauchi and Edo State Houses of Assembly should have fresh inauguration. The National Publicity Secretary, Lanre Issa Onilu, says the core issue is that the rule of law must be followed by the letter. And he said that, furthermore, the former chairman of the APC, Chief John Odigioyogo, has called on the Progressive Governors Forum to intervene and not stand aloof at the ongoing. It may be recalled that in the Edo State, 9 of its members moved to at 9:30 to inaugurate the assembly of 24 members, and that is raising the confusion that we're having there. Also in Bauchi, Bauchi had 11 members elect a speaker for the 31 members of the assembly at 7 a.m. When the time for the proclaimed inauguration at 10 a.m. arrived, the other members also arrived and elected a second speaker. So Bauchi is left with 2 speakers. Incidentally, the 2 states are all predominantly APC-dominated states. Edo has 24 members, all of them APC. Bauchi has, I think, 31 members, and about 7 of them belongs to the People's Democratic Party. The latest information is that the man who prevented an aircraft from taking off at Murtala Mohammed Airport when he was found walking on the wing has been arrested, and he has found that he's apparently having some mental challenges. They said the man was speaking and very incoherent. Meanwhile, he was apprehended 5 days earlier, wandering around the same airport at about 10 p.m. And now I begin to wonder how he was released and he still found his way back into the airport. He's said to be of Nigerian origin, and he's now with the police. They are still investigating. Meanwhile, the Federal Airports Authority says that 4 senior security officers have been suspended, and they are embarrassed by the development, and they are assured travelers that such incidences will not occur again.
It's indeed a huge embarrassment, if you ask me, because how could he do that, be able to climb to where he was found without being detected by any security official, and having been arrested from 5 days ago and released. They ought to have been monitoring him, or to carry out the normal responsibilities of monitoring the entire airport. That guy would have caused a very big harm to the aviation industry in Nigeria.
I think the challenge is this perimeter fencing for the airports. Don't forget that we've had about 2-3 instances. In fact, one occasionally almost a crash with even cows invading the perimeter fences of some of our airports. So that is a critical issue. But the good thing is that Federal Airports Authority has taken it up very critically and said that they assure all travelers such will not occur again.
Well, you see, what happened was a serious security breach. And
yes.
that aircraft was already taxiing, preparatory to takeoff. This gentleman was just wandering around to the place. So where are your CCTV cameras? Assuming you have CCTV cameras, who was supposed to be monitoring those cameras at the material time? And what was the response? We hear there are some suspensions already of some of the security chiefs and so on and so forth. But the truth of the matter is, unfortunately, sometimes we are lax about security in Nigeria until something happens, and then everybody, runs and say, no, this is a big threat, this is a big threat, and so on and so forth. So you're a total stranger, and then you find your way to the tarmac. And of course, look at what he did. There was one of the videos. He was climbing the engine. He was climbing the engine compartment, and then of course they also climbed the wing. At the time he was doing all of that, where were the security personnel? Suppose he had, some other incendiary device on him, what would have happened? Yes.
Even the technicians that should be around that aircraft as it was taxiing, that should be monitored. That should be monitoring of an aircraft when it's taxiing to take off.
Well, it had already left its parking spot, from where, of course, you normally have those groundsmen who would direct. So the communication now will be between him, that's the pilot,
and the control tower.
And the control tower. But I mean,
that's to a point to take off.
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay. But we go to this inside page story on the Pilot newspaper, Nigerian Pilot. It's an inside page story. It's on page 40. is on business now. So relief as NEC simplifies electricity meter acquisition for consumers. And then there's another story there. Investors to access 300 billion naira as federal government sets to privatize power companies. That's it for Nigerian pilot. Bayo, you have more.
Yes, there's some positive development from the National Assembly. The Senate President Ahmed Lawan says that for Nigeria, Nigerians should shelve all party differences, particularly senators, and work for collective interests of Nigeria so as to move the nation forward. He was speaking at an unveiling of a senatorial action plan by Senator Sani Musa Atmina. And the Senate President said, the ninth Senate, we have come under different platforms, but we have overcome party differences. It is now time to move on and make Nigeria a better place. We see ourselves as brothers and sisters. We are united on the need to have security improve, to have our rules fixed, and also to improve infrastructure, to make life better for all Nigerians. Governor Abubakar Bello of Niger State also lended a voice, and he said, you are senators of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and not APC and PDP senators. Senator Sani, who actually invited all of them, said, education is the core for strategic action plan, and that with that he will be able to dedicate the youth to improve their standing in society. This is a report that you read earlier on. Police in Kwara State say they are on the trail of the abduction, those who abducted 4 Turkish nationals. They were abducted at Bale in Edu local government area of Kwara State. The 4 Turkish nationals were working for an Istanbul concrete company. The spokesperson for the police in Kwara State, Ajayi Okasami, says now that the Operation Puff other operatives are on the trail of the kidnappers. And there's also a human interest story. A parent took their baby girl, 5-day baby girl, to the hospital. Unfortunately, the baby died 45 minutes after being admitted, and they couldn't take the baby home. By the time the baby was given to them, they found that the baby didn't have one ear. One ear had been severed off. So they challenged the hospital and threatened to sue the hospital. And they demanded 10 million naira from the hospital. The hospital operatives now engage an autopsy to provide a report. The parents did not agree with the hospital's autopsy. They got their own autopsy to provide a report. And the report indicated that actually the baby's ear had been eaten up by a rodent at the hospital. And there were signs of serrated, the ear of the rodent on the baby, the poor baby girl.
Where did this take place?
It happened in a hospital in Onitsha.
Rodents?
Rodents.
In the hospital?
So they said, very embarrassed.
Where was the body kept? Once the baby
The report
passed
did not
away?
indicate whether they had a mortuary or anything of that. But the parents were sad they couldn't take the baby. When they came and they were giving the baby the next day, when they unwrapped it, they found that there was no ear. One ear was gone.
But is it when the baby must have died that she was eaten up? Or
Yes, the autopsy indicated that the rodents bit the ear after the baby had died. Well, with our football now, the Super Eagles have come back with a bronze medal. Not only did they come back with the bronze medal, they got $2 million for placing third. Tunisia that we beat also got $2 million. Senegal that placed second got $2.5 million. While Algeria that have won the trophy after 29 years got $4.5 million. And guess what? One-time Nigerian superstar, Segun Odegbami, says, I will not and shall not celebrate the bronze medal because he said Nigeria is worth more than the bronze medal. And he has been reminded that, yes, it is true, in 1980 he scored 2 goals incidentally against the same Algeria when we won. But he celebrated a bronze medal when we won one from Ethiopia when he was still on the team.
Because
but already
that was in 1976.
Yes, Emmanuel Munike has already cautioned Nigeria to be very careful. We are currently grouped in the same, for Group L, for the 33rd championship in Cameroon, with Sierra Leone, Lesotho, and Benin. And he's warning us to be very careful of Benin Republic. It's not the Benin that we used to know before.
And again, we came back with a golden boot. A
golden ball, yes.
They has goal scorer.
A golden boot.
That's right. That's right.
For the high scorer, 5 goals.
It follows in the footsteps of Shegun Odegbami himself and Rashidi Yakini.
Okorocha too.
You didn't say Okorocha?
Okocha.
Oh, okay. I was wondering whether there has been a transformation.
When did Anayo Okorocha play football?
Okay, let's take our editorial this morning that is coming from the Nigerian Tribune. It's at page 13. And the title of the editorial is CJN as Chief Justice of Nigeria and Corruption in the Judiciary. Last week, the Senate confirmed the appointment of Justice Tanko Mohammed as a substantive Chief Justice of Nigeria. It says the CJN claimed that he was not surprised at the gravity of slates by judicial officers in the country because the grave situation was simply reflective of the decadence in the society at large. And he called for his holistic review of the criminal laws with a view to amending them. Many Nigerians have understandably become despondent because of unending leadership failure. The new CJN, the editorial adds, should therefore be as pragmatic and sincere as possible in proffering solutions to the challenges in the judiciary.
Well, the editorial by the Tribune is very critical of the Chief Justice of Nigeria, that he took the allegation of corruption with the judiciary very casual by just saying that apparently the society gets the judiciary it deserves, in the sense that the corruption is pervasive in the society and therefore the judiciary is no exception. And the editorial is saying at no point in where is any judge given bribe at gunpoint, and therefore they either solicit for it or they are lured to accept it, and therefore the judiciary must do something critically about it. But however, they agree with the Chief Justice of Nigeria that some of the laws, in fact, the Chief Justice placed the problem at the doorstep of the legislators, state houses of assembly, and members of the National Assembly. He says they should amend the law to make punishment for corruption more stringent.
Yeah, I also read last week, from the CJN that the corruption in the judiciary is more prevalent in the magistrate courts. Well, Kinsley,
All right, Bayo, we'd like to thank you for being around.
Thank you too.
We'll see you again tomorrow. Okay, it's Good Morning Nigeria, still on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We'll take a short break now. When we return, it will be time for our discussion segment.
They are there at the crack of dawn. They are there busy preparing while we rise for our day. They are there silently, guarding, waiting, listening, and watching. They are there ready in the sky above and the waters below, in the blistering heat of the day, in the dead of night, willing, indefatigable, determined in the defense of the sovereignty of our country. They are our first line of defense and our last. They who have paid the ultimate price in defending us. They are fathers and uncles. They are mothers and sisters and girlfriends and boyfriends. They are brothers and cousins and best friends and neighbors. They are classmates, colleagues, and citizens of this nation. They are our defenders and deserve our respect, our prayers, our thoughts. Nigeria, please support our armed forces.
We want to buy Indomie noodles. 4 packs, please.
Yo.
This is not my Indomie. Please, sir, if it's not Indomie, don't call it Indomie.
Sir, the taste is the difference. The difference is in the taste. That's why my brothers, my mommy, my daddy, and I all enjoy our delicious, so very delicious Indomie noodles. The difference is the taste.
Taste is the difference.
Yes, difference is in the taste. Nothing tastes like my Indomie.
Indomie Super Pack, now available at 85 Naira. Indomie noodles, tasty nutrition, good for you.
Here you go.
Madam.
That's it. Those Nairas are enough.
Hi, dear. Helen! You got so much even after spending so little.
Savings is such a necessity.
You save everywhere, but here, you lose it all. How? With this?
Impossible.
New Tika Apic 10X. Even after applying up to 1 liter of your solution multiple times, you won't get the same cleaning that Apic gives you in a single round.
And the expense?
Far less compared to your 1 liter of solution. New Tika Apic. Toughen cleaning,
toughen savings.
You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria on the NTA network service, and to give a background to the discussion on the program this morning, which is on tax incentives and the Nigerian economy against reports of sharp practices and losses. Here is Abdulmalik Adio with this report.
The global dip in oil prices and the resulting economic recession in Nigeria are amongst factors that have culminated in an increased focus on revenue generation through taxation in the country. Following the mandate by the federal government, the Federal Inland Revenue Service (FRS) is said to have intensified its drive for tax collection with expected gains. Experts say the tax to gross domestic product (GDP) ratio has not yielded much result as it continued to over around 6%. The development many find worrisome, given that the tax to gross domestic product is one of the most widely used tools for measuring the efficiency of a country's tax system. Recent data from the National Bureau of Statistics indicates that Nigerians' gross domestic product (GDP) stood at 16.5 trillion in the second quarter of 2018, while government total collection in taxes was barely 1.3 trillion in that quarter. Going by the report, the oil sector contributed about 9% to the GDP in Nigeria, while that of the non-oil sector was put at 91.45%. The way out, experts say, is for a comprehensive review of the current tax administrative system and the overall of the Nigerian economy in changing the rhetorics. Where did Nigeria get it wrong with its tax system? What are the sanctions for tax offenders? Answers in a short while with guests on Good Morning Nigeria, who will deliberate on effort in improving the tax system in the country.
All right, now joining us in the studios here to discuss this subject matter in greater detail, would like to welcome Saleh Abubakar, who is a tax and ICT consultant. Saleh, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Good morning, Nigerians.
Okay. Also here with us in the studios is a legal practitioner and a tax expert, Oluwaseun Kadri. Oluwaseun, pleasure to have you with us on Good Morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
And Henry Ushe is of Oxfam International Public and Private Sector Transparency and Accountability Office. Indeed, is the officer in charge of Oxfam Nigeria in terms of that subsector. Henry Ushe, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Okay.
All right, and from our Lagos studio, we have Adesina Adebayo. Adesina Adebayo is the Vice President, Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
All right, Kieran, I think we better start the conversation from our Lagos network studios, where we just introduced the Vice President of CITN, Adesina Adebayo. Mr. Adebayo, our principal focus, of course, today has to do with the exploitation and abuse of tax incentives. What range of tax incentives are there today in the Nigerian economy? And who are the major beneficiaries, and what kind of abuses are we seeing?
Thank you once more. The issue of tax incentives has always been there with us. And we have the range of tax incentives, right from even talking about pioneer legislation, and then you have incentives relating to infrastructural relief. You have incentives that are even industry-based. And with this incentive, it is meant to stimulate the economy. Now, the challenge we have is that, one, how do you actually measure the effect of these incentives within the economy? What is it costing us, and what are we benefiting? These are the challenges we have to start talking about managing today. While it is good that we should give incentives, the benefit of the incentives must be felt within the economy, and it must be measurable in terms of impact. Otherwise, we lose it out. And this is the challenge we are talking about today.
Okay, we'll return to you in due course, because we would like to see further explanations. Going by the question that I can put to you, there are unanswered aspects of that, which we'll return to you for much later. But for now, let's come back to Abuja, to Saleh Abubakar, ICT and tax consultant. We are looking at incentives and, of course, the challenges that's been big cloud in Nigeria. Say incentives, let's share what you know concerning incentives and, of course, the challenges therein.
Okay, good morning, Nigerians, once again. When we talk of incentive, we are talking about the benefit that someone will enjoy or given to someone to encourage that person do something specific. So when we talk of tax incentives, usually we're talking about reducing taxes for businesses or individuals in exchange for specific desirable actions or investment from them on their own part. And that is to the purpose is to encourage these people or businesses to offer some services to the community, a kind of an encouragement to have a social behavioral commitment to a community to achieve something, which can be given by or offered by the federal government, state government, or local government, or anybody that has the responsibility of collecting taxes so as to achieve a certain result. So thereby, when you aim at businesses, organizations, or individuals and give them incentives to do that thing, and some of them try to abuse that privilege by either not doing it or not doing it good, then at the end of it, the aim of giving the incentives is defeated from the beginning. And these incentives come in several ways. So depending on the type of incentive that is given and where it should be applied, it comes in the forms of either tax deduction, tax credit, tax forgiveness, or even tax for service, which I believe is one of the best way to go about it. But in several cases, all the tax incentives given are abused. And moreover, it usually comes due to lack of mechanism for monitoring and evaluation, as well as penalties that are supposed to be meted on those that defaulted in the first place for others that are coming, because we are still giving tax incentives, which I believe we are going to discuss further during the course of the program.
All right, Saleh, thank you very much. Henry O'Shea, your organization, Oxfam, of course, issued a report which was something of a red flag with regard to abuses. But still on the range of tax incentives that we're looking at, what is it that we know at this time about those incentives and what kinds of manipulation are we seeing from the beneficiaries otherwise of the incentives?
All right, thank you very much. Essentially, tax incentive is not bad in its totality. It's just the application of it that actually is the problem that we face in this part of the country or part of the world. So like you mentioned, we actually released a report just this week, or last week rather, called the Fair Tax Monitor in Nigeria. The report actually intends to do a comparative analysis of how well we are doing in terms of tax structure and regime across in the country, basically. Then some kind of comparative analysis in terms of how are we doing in certain area, like how progressive is our tax system, how much revenue do we get from tax, and looking at how pro-poor those kinds of spending that we get from, that we use taxes to spend on, and then how does it contribute to the budget eventually. So basically, what we try to look in that report is one of the very key problems that we're discussing to the tax incentives. So we look in the report, we actually looked at how much we lose, to tax incentives and all of that, because incentives come in various forms. Like he mentioned, it could come in terms of tax relief. It will come in form of in terms of tax rebate and all of that. It could also come in form of like the VAT itself. The VAT is also some form of tax relief if you have tax incentives. So what we look at is how is the tax institutions like FRS and others, the State Board of Internal Revenue, how do they manage those kind of incentives that are being given out? And then the report says that about $3.3 billion is lost annually, to tax incentives. Then think of what this can actually do, in terms of providing essential services for the people. Because every single time we give out incentives, when you give out incentive, what you do basically is that you actually give out those money that are meant for hospitals, for schools, for good roads and all of that. But in a way, if we are able to manage our incentives in such a manner that those who enjoy the incentives eventually are able to give back to the institutions in terms of, so, okay, if you're giving incentive, it should be like my brother said from Lagos mentioned, it should be such that the cost benefit analysis is actually put into perspective. So what do we gain when we provide certain incentives? What do we lose when we provide such incentives? Just sometime last year, we witnessed that okay, some big individuals in our society, were giving some incentive in terms of public-private partnership, So we now looked at that kind of incentives to say, has the government actually looked at what they were going to benefit from giving out that kind of incentive to those kind of individuals or firms, And then if they have looked at that critically, how much will those communities within where those companies are established, how much will those communities gain in terms of either CSR or in terms of facilities that leads to maybe facilities that can benefit the people directly and all of that. So generally speaking, the report tries to explore the cost benefit analysis of providing incentives and other issues around taxation within our system.
Well, some experts, have said that incentives can have both a negative and a positive impact. And from all the explanations we've had this morning, that tends to be the truth. Now, let's go to Oluwaseun, who is a tax expert. Now, the incentive we're talking about is designed to incentivize or encourage a particular economic activity or activities, as it were. Now, we are talking of those that benefit from incentives, who do not bring about a commensurate action, so, after being incentivized. What is the challenge and how do you get out of it?
For me, I'll give you a practical instance where incentives actually work. And a very recent innovation from this past administration was the Road and Infrastructure Development Tax Credit, which was given to certain companies. And in order to develop our federal, or we don't know if it's federal or state now, but generally roads, you understand, probably because the government doesn't have the funds to develop those roads, and you will look at such an innovation in such trying times for Nigeria as very, very laudable. And that's actually the kind of credit we need at this instance. But, there's been various abuses over the years. Like in 2011, for example, between 2011 to 2015, there was over 1 trillion lost in tax incentive. And the reason is probably because the monitoring scheme is very poor. That's monitoring the incentive themselves, and we rather give incentives to individuals rather than companies that actually do need them. For example, I was speaking with a client sometimes some 2 weeks ago, and it is actually planning to. There are some investors planning to invest in Nigeria and to develop a particular sector. And I asked him, like, what are your plans when it comes to taxes? And he was like, oh, don't worry, we know them. They will give us tax holidays and all. And I was like, that is the abuse that we are actually referring to. When someone just feels as if you politicize everything, rather than give the actual companies that actually would have a good impact in the nation, you give it to individuals. And the solution is very simple. My colleagues have already spoken about the cost-benefit analysis. That's actually the first point of call when you're talking about incentive. The first thing you need to think about is, what is the cost and what is the benefit of this particular incentive? Does it make any sense? Are we gaining more than we're losing? Then when you think about other things as regards to monitoring as well, there are a lot of administrations that have a hand or the other in monitoring this incentive. For example, FIRS, Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, the Nigerian Customs. So there are quite a lot of people trying to do the same thing at the same time. So there will probably be room for some lapses and gaps. So we need to think of how these guys can work together in order to ensure that they monitor these incentives specifically, and they ensure that the incentives are actually deliver the desired results. You know, because we always have an idea of giving that incentive in the first place, in the sense that we want to encourage investment, we want to stimulate growth, but we need to strike a balance if those incentives actually are delivering on their desired purposes.
Okay, Oluwaseun, thank you very much. Back again to Additional Adebayo in our Lagos Network Center. In looking at the regimes of tax incentives that we have, where have we had, in your opinion, the most benefit? Is it from the pioneer status, tax holiday, or tax credit, such as we have seen lately with the tax infrastructure, that is to develop infrastructure, and then we give you credit? A number of companies in the past, had tax holidays, others were giving pioneer status. What is it that we have observed as an institute?
Thank you very much once again. One of the things we need to actually bear in mind before I address that question is the fact that let's take a look at even our 50 years gap. Between 1969 and 2019, the population of Nigeria was actually around 50 million in 1969. And we are talking about 200 million plus in 2019. And then you ask, what should be the priority of government to stimulate investment in order to get a lot of people having a job? Look at the tax holiday given to the telecom companies. At the point of giving them the tax holidays, it is actually meant to enable them to put infrastructure in place, employ a lot of Nigerians, and stimulate the economy. And that becomes a plus on its own. And then you look at aspect that even Seun just mentioned relating to the road infrastructure. You have a situation where that if the road is developed, whether it is federal or state, and then the issue of the gridlock we have in Apapa, for example, becomes something that becomes a thing of history, especially when the roads are properly constructed and done very well. Now, going further, you have a situation where you cannot evaluate what is the benefit you are getting from this tax credit. What do we have related to that? We have the rural investment allowance, and you have a situation where you have infrastructural facility, there is a benefit to that. You talk about there is nothing, no facility at all, you have 100% rural investment, if it is a certain kilometer away from where you are located. All these are benefits that goes about with issues of investment. Now, you talk about even of tax credit. Tax credit means that, look, you have a benefit of not being able to pay what you are supposed to pay because you have done something that makes the government happy with you, technically speaking. Now, incentive on its own relating to this is actually meant to encourage you to take a particular line of action. And then you have relief too, that is meant to mitigate the effect of the pain of paying tax. With all this at the back of our mind, we know that incentives is actually meant to be in line with government policy. These issues have been addressed, and I have to give credit to the current leadership of Federal Inland Revenue Service, as exemplified by Mr. Tunde Fowler. Issues that borders on policies, that borders on law, that borders on even administration. This seems to be taking a priority issue in the current government. And if you look at that, issues of incentives should equally be taking that priority. Let us evaluate what is the essence of even our double taxation relief. What's the essence of the investment we are giving in terms of allowance? What is it costing us? How many people are we able to put on the job in terms of all these things? If a population can double like 4, over a period of 50 years, you can see that we do not have the same challenge we have in 1969 in 2019. And these are issues that we now need to have a government that is now talking about being proactive. We cannot use yesterday's strategy to manage tomorrow's challenges. These are the areas we need to be very clear. Now, talking about another benefit to this, immediately we are trying to craft an incentive. We should ask ourselves, what do we intend to achieve? You don't talk about incentives without having a benefit at the back of your mind. As you're encouraging the companies, you also want to be sure that what they are doing is not being abused. It's not being something that they are trying to play around with, getting the benefit without actually letting us also get the benefit of giving them the incentives. And like what Eric said, the issue of incentive is something that has to do with we are losing something in order to gain something. Because if we do not give you the incentive, you are also duty bound by virtue of our law to pay those taxes that we are giving you the benefit of the incentive on. And with this at the back of our mind, we know that, look, incentives must be something that we sit down before we even craft it, to say that, look, we are about to give you an incentive, and this is the expectation we have after giving you that incentive. And if that expectation does not align with our cost of giving you the incentive, we need to go back to the drawing board and ask ourselves some question. Is it really giving us the desired outcome? Are we getting the benefit of the incentive? And if we are not, we need to now rethink it in order to ensure that, look, we do not lose out at all about it. Now, talking further again relating to this, you still have a situation where every day we are putting together a lot of incentives that seem to be disconnected. And like Sheon also mentioned, you have the NIPC, you have the FROS. We need to talk about a team-based team. In all fairness, I have to say that the current leadership of FROS has been busy trying to ensure that we do not have pocket size of decision being taken by different agencies. We're having a situation where the JTB as a body, for example, is talking about the national identification number. Now, with this at the back of our mind, we're having a situation where all these issues of database are being coordinated, and they are being coordinated from the perspective of giving us the right deliverables. Now, on acceptance certificate, for example, which gives you the benefit of enjoying the capital allowance, there is a ministry that is meant to ensure that, look, you actually invested in capital expenditure. Otherwise, you may have a situation where somebody will not incur any capital expenditure and he wants to get the benefit of those allowances. There is a need for that audit process that has to do with another ministry, ensuring that, look, we have an acceptance certificate to justify the fact that you actually incur this expenditure. Now, these are all things that we need to now come up with a situation where we have the database that justify the fact that the infrastructural deficit we have in the country is being addressed. And when you address infrastructural deficit, the beneficiary of that addressing the infrastructural deficit will be the Nigerian masses. And when the Nigerian masses are there, you see a situation where the government, they're happy with the government. If 94 million Nigerians are already operating below poverty line, let's be sincere with ourselves. The person that is even saying is above poverty line is having more than 7 dependents. So which means the day he loses his job, 8 people have been thrown down again into poverty. So our focus should actually be that any incentive we are giving should stimulate our economy and develop us in such a way that our people get jobs and they have the benefit of going ahead to make those things happen. Now, talking further again, beyond the issue of getting our people back on the district, we need to be looking at the issue of capacity. If you look at the latest Indonesian figure that says that, look, this government is addressing the issue of their labor-intensive industries. We need to actually encourage a lot of companies to build capacity among our people. And like I said, if we are trying to build capacity among the people, it means that we need to have a situation where we close the skill gap. In closing this skill gap, then there is a need to actually look at what is the benefit of our education as of today. What is the type of education we need in order to step into the tomorrow? This needs to be addressed. The government may not be able to address all this, and the government may not even be able to address it from the perspective of positioning our people in such a way that at the end of the day, they are not losing their jobs. And then thirdly, we need to also ask ourselves a question. Do we have the current capacity in terms of making sure our people are able to be there tomorrow?
Yes, we may have to pause you at this point. You've actually done the explanation to the point where we'll stop you and, of course, dissect some of the issues that you have raised, in responding to Kingsley's question. And one aspect of that I'd like to play up is that aspect of benefit. The benefit derivable from incentives, and that also brings us to the issue of who is eligible to get these incentives. What category of business or individuals are eligible to get incentive? Because if we are looking at benefit, and then you have to ensure that whoever is getting it has the capacity, as Adesina mentioned, to be able to do that. And incentives target benefit with some positive effects on the society. That's what he has been able to analyze. And now it's always difficult, to estimate the benefits. And I'm coming to Salah Abubakar. Give us a clue of the kind of benefits that are derivable from such. And if in the past Nigeria has enjoyed such benefits, can we share that with you?
Okay. When we talk of incentives, just like I mentioned before, we have several types of incentives, like the tax deduction, tax credit, tax reduction, and or forgiveness. Then the tax for service. Let me give you an example. During the voluntary asset and income declaration scheme, the Vice President mentioned that we have 14 million taxpayers in our database. After the voluntary and income tax declaration, we are now up to 19 million. That means we have an increase in 5 million taxpayers now paying their taxes. This is an example of it. Now, if you look at the Executive Order 8, which is for the voluntary offshore asset regularization scheme again, which gives like paying 35% of what you are supposed to pay for all the offshore assets you have, then that is a plus to the system, which is a benefit as well. And these are all tax reduction or forgiveness. When we talk of tax credit, just like my colleague here mentioned, we have the road infrastructure, which is the Executive Order 7, which is coming, which is a benefit to us. Then we talk about things like tax for service, because sometimes when we talk of incentives, we only look at what the federal government is doing. We don't look at the state or the local government. And we tend to forget this tax for service as an incentive, which is why sometimes back, I think we are here on a program which we started even explaining tax for service, something like what we now call an incentive-based tax strategy for the informal sector. These are people operating within the informal sector of our economy, but they are not actually in our database, so they are not even paying taxes, and we have them in millions. Because during the voluntary asset and income declaration scheme, the Vice President mentioned that Nigeria has about 70 million active, economically active individuals. And out of that, we have the 14 million in the tax base. Then that means we have over almost 15 million that are not captured in our tax system. So we now look at this and say, okay, what are these people doing and how do we get them into this tax system? Then that means if we can have incentives for these people too, then they can be in our tax base. But what are their general needs, their day-to-day needs? Education, health, all these things. Then why don't we have tax for service as an incentive for these people so that we can have them into the tax net? And we'll look at this and say, okay, now if we have a situation whereby a cobbler can afford to pay 10 naira per day as tax, that is 300 naira every month. In a particular state, you have more than 3 million people operating in the informal sector that are not captured in their database. If you have 1 million people paying 10 naira per day as tax, then you will generate 300 million every month, 3.6 billion every year. That means if you have double that number, 2 million people or 3 million people, you will generate 900 million on a monthly basis and 10.8 billion annually. Then we now look at this and say, okay, now we went all the way to these primary healthcare centers and check, okay, what are the usual ailments that people do come to treat on daily basis? 70% of them, malaria. Cost of treatment, 350 to 500 naira. Now, if these people are paying this amount, why can't we get some amount from this amount we are generating, the 300 million naira, and make these people directly by just registering them as taxpayers, they now move into the health insurance program, automatic, so that this amount will now be deducted from the taxes and given back to them as incentive so that they enjoy the health insurance program automatic. We now look at this and did the calculation and we found that yes, it's achievable. This can be used as a tax incentive for the taxpayer. We now take education. We were in a particular state where it has 138 public schools. And each school, even though under the universal basic education, you are supposed to have the basic between the primary to first 3 years of your secondary school free. But we found out that under the National Education Data Survey that was conducted 2015, pupils pay between 750 naira to 1,500 naira as either PTO or exam fees. Now, in that particular state, they have 138 public schools, and they are generating about 308 million from these exam fees that they are collecting from these pupils. And it stops some parents from sending their kids to school because of the number of kids they have at home. And we say, okay, if we can take this 300 million from the 3.6 billion we can generate from 1010 naira, then that means we can now kind of motivate the universal basic education and send these kids to school free. Nobody should pay any exam fee anymore. So these are tax for service incentives that can be incorporated into the tax system, and we see the benefit that's going to be directly impacting on the individuals.
I think, Salah, Kieran, I'm tempted to stay with him, because the other leg of the question, you've talked now about, so let's say, the bottom of the pyramid,
yes,
in terms of incentives that can be given to them, so that, one, you brought in the tax base and then cast the net wider and then raking more money.
Yes, sir.
It would appear that in the case of Nigeria, usually the abuses that we're talking about will be with the top drawer players. That is to say, those big corporations or big individuals. Years past, we used to hear of abuse of waivers, for instance,
exactly,
on the importation of sugar, no taxes, no nothing, and all of that. You recall that. So where is it, who now benefits in terms of the upper brackets? Let's know, VIDS was like a general amnesty.
Exactly.
A general tax amnesty. So what are we seeing now in terms of corporations or in terms of organizations or high net worth individuals who are getting tax incentives that are somewhat injurious to the economy?
Okay, when we look at that angle, we now see that previous years back, we have this type of incentives, just like you mentioned, and waivers, whereby companies will be given this tax credit to either import rice, sugar, or something. And at the end of it, we don't have what they are supposed to bring. And at the end of it, they take all the credit without paying taxes to the government. But when we talk of the issue, we now look at, for every tax that is supposed to be given, there's supposed to be a guideline, a law that is guiding it, in terms of either monitoring and evaluation, enforcement, defaulting, and all this. So sometimes it's because of connivance with politicians, whereby whatever tax credit is given to them, they now give something out or back to the politicians that gave them that waiver. And at the end of it, no any monitoring or evaluation mechanism is going to be useful, or any penalty meted on them, because virtually they are sharing what, or the profit they are getting from that tax credit with the politicians. So as far as you have some people that are in politics, or the politicians, part of this crime, because it is a crime actually, part of this crime, then automatically the monitoring and evaluation is not going to work. That means for you to have this one, there has to be this monitoring and evaluation mechanism and all the penalties that are there based on what is in the tax policy. And it has to be meted out to these individuals as to show examples to the ones that are coming. But what we used to have before, nothing has happened to those up to this moment. Some of them went with it and it's gone. So automatically we have this as a problem. But I feel if we can have a situation whereby these individuals will now be brought to book based on the type of crime they committed, then at least we are going to have a sanitized incentive system that is going to work for us, because actually incentives is good, and it is good for the economy.
Yes, so we'd like to, Henry Shea to come in here. It's the same question, looking at why we don't get the result, especially when incentives are given to big-time companies in this country.
Yeah, so essentially, I know incentives basically they are given to companies within certain areas like manufacturing, maybe agri products, and maybe oil and gas as well. And that's why you see most of these very big companies, who operate within the oil and gas sector, enjoy a whole lot of these incentives. And thing is that you tend to see, like within our laws anyway, it's allowed you give them first 3 years, first 5 years, as the case may be, and then maybe renew for another 2 years, and maybe get another 5 years again. But what we see within that realm is that most of these big companies, they have a couple of board of directors now, and then after 3 years, they just change the name, and then come back again as the same company, enjoy the same 3-5 years again, and then it can go on and on for 20 years or more, enjoying the same incentive. So we have a system that doesn't really actually check these kinds of anomalies. We have a system that doesn't actually, pay attention to to who are these board of directors, who are these companies, how are they registered, do they actually do their annual returns, and all of that, how are they being monitored to ensure that these same guys don't come back, enjoy the same incentive over and over and over again. The case of some people saying that, okay, within that realm, federal government have tried in terms of reviewing the incentives regime, in terms of, say, okay, in 2017, looking at the new tax policy, that the incentive regime was renewed. But if you look at it critically, we at Oxfam and the Tax Justice Network and platform, we look at that critically, and we realized that what the federal government did was not to look at who benefit basically, but to look at exactly that, okay, fine, so company have benefit over time. Now for them, what federal government look at basically is to look at who are these companies per se, but not to look at what benefits have those incentives provided for the people over time, or what has the system, because the Nigerian economy benefited from these people over time. So we said, okay, fine, can we look at what we have benefited over time and what they as companies have benefited over time? With that kind of analysis, we cannot begin to say, okay, fine, we can either give you more incentive or take away your incentive. But the challenge that we have always, or the solution we've already profiled over time, is that can the government help by providing a conducive environment for business to thrive rather than giving out incentives? So if the environment for business is conducive and companies can actually make profit and then maybe give back in terms of CSR to the communities and all of that, then we can begin to say, okay, fine, yeah, this kind of incentive can no longer go on, or it can go on in a way. So but essentially what we also witness again within our work is that, looking at what you mentioned in terms of benefits now, the tax to service agreement within our work in the informal sector as Oxfam, we work with a lot of tax platforms across 16 states in the south, and then we are thinking of expanding to the north as well. What we see there is that the apathy in terms of tax compliance that we witness is that these people in the informal sector feel that they don't benefit anything whatsoever in terms of tax compliance. So what has their tax given them back, given or brought to them over time? How have they benefited from paying taxes over time? So what we did with them in some local government is to say, okay, can some local government go into a pact, what we call tax to service agreement, with some communities or markets, big markets, to say, okay, we take so amount of tax from you over time. Can we put back 20% into that market in terms of drainage facilities, latrines for people to use? Because you go to some market, the whole place is in shambles. People pay from their pockets to clear their drainages and clear their, and then maybe use their latrines as well. So can government put back 20%? I will record a lot of achievement from there, like from some local governments in Akwa Ibom State, some local governments in Enugu State, and some other, I think in Delta as well. So then signed to put back into the community 20% of whatever they take from tax, back into those markets. And that has made people to even be more compliant in terms of tax payment, and also begin to beat their chest to say, yes, they have been able to benefit from tax payments over time. But I tell you something also, that people think that those in the informal sector don't pay taxes. I don't agree with that, because 80% of business activities happen within the informal sector. And these guys pay taxes, a lot of taxes, multiple taxes if you ask me. But the challenge has been that those who collect those taxes are illicit collectors. They are not people who are authorized to collect taxes. So the challenge is, how will the government come in to ensure that those who collect taxes are the real people to collect taxes? So what we did in some local government, for example, like in Buhari local government, what we did there was identify the stakeholders, bring them together with the tax collectors within the local government, the area council, look at those tax authorities like the revenue department. And then they had a town hall, shared all their problems and all of that. So what they did there was to streamline all the taxes, publish it, put it on their notice board. So if you are a tomato seller, you're a vegetable seller, you're a yam seller, you know what category of tax you fall into. So you go right there.
Henry, are these taxes or levies?
Well, eventually people lose money.
Well, yeah,
that's the bottom line. From the development perspective, people lose money.
It's a technical thing. When you say tax because the power to impose tax, you know, is constitutionally defined.
Yes.
I mean, a local government guy, a chairman cannot just wake up and say, I'm imposing this tax on you.
You can impose levy.
Yes, a levy. You can impose a levy, you know, and that
what he's saying is that
could be
money,
arbitrary.
money leaves someone's pocket.
That's well, in the end, that's what it does. That's one. I just wanted to bring in Oluwaseun again. And by the way, when you were talking about what they will use the money for, he kept referring to latrines. Can you upscale that a bit to WCs, you know? Instead of all the latrines in marketplaces, you know? So that's one.
What I mean by latrine is that it's not
A latrine,
just
sorry, this is a money
it,
program.
yeah.
A latrine is a latrine. A WC. So okay,
But it's
because
not
you
the
have a
same-
water
it's not the same
system.
purpose.
Yes, you have to have a water supply
Exactly.
and all of that. You know, you wash your hands with
That
soap.
means
You know,
a
because
lot more infrastructure is required.
that's
Not
right.
just-
Okay, Oluwaseun, look, let's come back again to the big players and the kind of incentives that they get away with. How scrupulous is our surveillance system to ensure that some of these legal shenanigans that we get to hear of, you know, a company getting into business, fading out, fading off, and then reappearing again, and continually having a pioneer status, and also enjoying tax holidays. How rigorous is our surveillance system?
You know, Nigeria is has been working assiduously with respect to data, you know, and using technology to harness as much taxes as we can, you know, and in this particular instance, it should also apply. The first problem we have is multiplicity of agencies that deal with these incentives. You know, when so many agencies deals with incentives, there will tend to be gaps and leakages, and monitoring it will be quite very difficult. But this is what technology can do. You know, technology can bridge this gap between these agencies. We can set up a particular department within the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, and you have a representative from the Nigerian Customs. You know, you have a department that brings people from all these other agencies together in one place, and they monitor critically these things. And you also have to integrate data. You have to collect the data of the people that are even enjoying these incentives in the first place, and you have to monitor the activities very critically. And you know, the solution to not abusing incentive is very clear in the revised national tax policies, and it says, let us monitor and evaluate this thing. Let us ensure that these incentives are broad and are sector-based. Let us ensure that the people that are meant to enjoy these incentives are actually the one enjoying this incentive. These things are not going to work, you know, like magic. You know, so we have to integrate technology in order to bridge this gap.
No, see, showing. I'm sorry, that doesn't quite address the question.
Okay.
You make all these broad policy objectives and policy direction.
Yes.
Be sure that those who will get them will get them. Who is the authority for granting tax incentives? Earlier you talked about NIPC is supposed to be a one-stop shop.
Exactly.
But are there other centers that are authorized to incentivize specific sectors for the purposes of saying, look, let us have investments, let us galvanize growth and development in the economy?
Yes, obviously there are other institutions that are involved. And I'll give you a practical instance where there were some issues. For example, NIPC is the one it should be the one in charge. But at the same time, FRS also is the one that, because I'm aware of a certain company that was, you know, going to invest in the solar sector. And NIPC was the one to grant them this pioneer status. They were going to have tax holidays for a period of 3 years, renewable for 2 years. But at the same time, FRS is the one to give them the certificate to show that, okay, you guys have actually been granted this incentive indeed. You know, but if you look at the way it works, there is one that is in charge of granting the incentive, there's another one granting giving the actual certificate. Then at some point, FRS came up and was like, there are some guys that were not meant to get this incentive in the first place. And they started raising assessments on those particular companies again. So between that 2011 and 2015 I spoke about, the most incentive was the custom waivers, the import waivers during that period. Obviously it's custom that is in charge of that as well. There's also the export processing zone. There's another institution in charge of that. So if you look at it, the agencies involved are so many, and if it continues to be like that, there's no how we're not going to continue to have gaps. There's no how we're going to be able to monitor and evaluate these guys properly.
It is almost clear, I'm sorry, Saleh Abubakar, it is almost clear from what we know and what we see that, look, a tax holiday in Nigeria will be 5 years. 3 years in the first instance, then of course renewable for another 2 years. In the vast majority of cases, unless of course the company collapses or otherwise, it will be 5 years. But the question is, after the grant of that holiday and for you to take off, are the granting authorities in a position to also supervise that company to be sure that the timelines it has set for what it will invest and how the business will take off, is that those timelines are actually being complied with, that the business is doing what it was incentivized to do?
Actually, I believe for a project, any project, it has to follow the project management methodology from initiation up to closing, planning, execution, monitoring, and control. So I believe if a particular project is going to be incentivized and given to the people, there has to be a project timeline for it. This is what we are supposed to do, and this is why it will take us from this number of years to this number of years, so that if we know, okay, this is the tax we are supposed to be paying every month, so at the end of this year, this is what we are supposed to be paying. So if you are given tax holiday, that tax holiday is supposed to cover exactly what you're going to have, including maybe part of your profit, based on what you invest in that. So I believe both for the company that is going to be given the incentives and the monitoring organization, they are supposed to have this project timeline for the project based on what the project is supposed to do for the particular community we're talking about, so that there won't be any gap or any issue that will now be raised at the end of it that after giving us this tax holiday for 5 years, we are unable to recoup what we've invested in this one. So for you to have that one, I believe before you even start any project, you have to know that even after giving the tax holiday or incentives, that project is going to come within the timeline and is going to be implemented within this timeline of the 5 years, including getting profit for what you've invested in it. Else, there is no need starting a project that you know at the end of it you're going to lose. So both the monitoring body and the company that is incentivized has to have a project plan. In fact, before you are even given the project, you're supposed to submit a project plan for whatever it is you want to do. And that is exactly what the Federal Inland Revenue is supposed to even use in giving you the certificate. Because just like he mentioned, the organization is there to give you the incentives, but it is the FIRS that's supposed to give you the certificate. And that is exactly what is in the law. Yeah. So automatically you have to have the project timeline for whatever project you're going to have, which will indicate that the tax holiday that's going to be given to you based on the agreement is going to cover all expenses and costs. Then the Federal Inland Revenue Service will now give you the certificate. Then if there's any fault, then it is from you that is going to, if you have any problem, which we are now going to report to the authorities, if there's any, because we have issues of force majeure or anything that may come up within this time frame.
All right, indeed. That's a good explanation there. But I think, gentlemen, that what is lacking actually, and if you also bring up the question, like Kinsley, asked a short while ago, it has to do with you incentivize someone and give him 3 years, and after 3 years, after the expiration of the 3 years, now who monitors that company to ensure that they have started paying, and what are they worth in terms of tax and all of that. And what I've said that is very important is that sometimes when the 3 years expires, they may renegotiate renegotiate, with the agencies, of the authorities, and continue to enjoy which is unlawful. That is where the question Kinsley asked was going to. But gentlemen, before we take a break, let's go to Lagos and get additional Adebayo. There is one thing here from one analysis that there are four typical costs to tax incentives. One is a resource allocation cost, which has to do with the revenue that government loses, as a result resulting from incentives. Another is the compliance cost. That has to do with when incentive is concentrated on a particular area of business, leaving others, with just a little, which is where I want Adebayo to concentrate on. Now, what nature of or kind of incentives do Nigerian government give? And if such incentives are concentrated on a particular area of business, it does seem that many other important areas are neglected. Give us an analysis of what you understand by the kind of incentives that we give.
Very much. Relating to the issue of the kind of incentive we give, the issue of a resource cost and compliance issue also come in. Now, naturally, the government has a broad objective. They want to stimulate development in so many areas as much as possible. And this requires that they need to actually look at it. What will it cost us in terms of resources? If we decide we want to do this on our own, do we even have the managerial capacity? Do we have what it takes to be able to stimulate the economy in this area? If the answer is a no, and you want to encourage people to invest in that particular area, then you now have to look at it and incentivize them, so that at the end of the day, they are encouraged to move towards that side. Now, if I have to use a simple analogy, if I realize that in my family, for example, we need a little bit of medical doctors in order to do that, then I may actually set up a fund and say, look, if you decide you want to go for medicine, we will take you from beginning to the end. And that will encourage a lot of people who do not want to even read relating to this science issue to go along that side. And before you know what's happening, do a simple arithmetic calculation. In 10, 15, 20 years' time, we may have so many medical doctors within the family. And that means it is clear that I actually encourage them to follow a particular line of direction. Now, the government looks at the economy in totality and says, look, do we have the resources for this? Do we have the expertise for this? That becomes the basis for saying, look, let's get this done through these incentives, and then including reliefs and allowances peculiar to that particular sector. Now, from talking about the issue of compliance, now the compliance aspect has to now do with one, how do you ensure, for example, that the cost already relating to this, as to the compliance issue, where do you get the benefit as a government? This is now what, like the Oxfam study shows, over 580 billion. And then the next question is, if we even do a further study of this, maybe by the time you come again, you now realize that we even have more than that. Now, what is the impact? What is the benefit we have derived when we have about 580 billion already at risk based on what we have already done so far? And who is actually meant to do a study of this? And like Harry also mentioned in the course of this discussion, that what will be the impact of 580 billion when it comes to directing it towards a particular area of helping the society? And these are all issues. Resources were limited. Even when you have this, you have to even prioritize. What are those things that require priority? And what are those areas the government cannot even engage in? Then it comes to the issue of compliance. Fine. You have the one that was mentioned earlier by one of the speakers. Mention something like voluntary asset and income disclosure, voluntary offshore asset regularization scheme. All this comes at a cost. Because if you look at the executive orders related to this, it says, look, we will forgive you the issue of penalty, forgive you the issue of tax audit. We won't go too far into actually confirming the authenticity of what you said, but please don't lie to us. That is more or less like the summary. Please don't lie to us. Come out openly, and then we ask you to go and sin no more. This is an encouragement. And by the time this is done, the person has found himself into the tax net, is already recognized, identified, and there can be a follow-up relating to this. Now, the essence of incentive is to actually ask ourselves, what constitutes the implication of the brain drain we even have in the system? You have a situation in the country, for example, take the medical industry. You have people that will rather want to go out, and you have medical doctors going out. They are being encouraged by UK, they are being encouraged by UAE to come into their area. And immediately we have this happening. What happened within the system? We lose the benefit of these educated hands. We are not having a situation where we don't have enough doctors even to meet the needs we have here. This could be an area where even the government can look at. Take the manufacturing sector. In Aswani in Lagos here, in some 30 years ago, when you mention Aswani, you are talking about a place where you have a lot of textile companies operating within that sector. What has become of the place as of today? What does the government need to do to stimulate investment in this area? What are the challenges that we can actually talk about that needs to be addressed? Incentives must be looked at by evaluating both the resource and the compliance implication. And this is very critical. Now, I'm talking further. You now say, before we can say we are coming up with a model of the type of incentive we need to grant. In coming up with that model, we need to look at it holistically. Somebody also mentioned earlier that you have the NIPC, you have the FROS, you want to actually see them working together. They belong to the same government. They are working in the interest of the same government. So it is challenging for us to now have a situation where they don't seem to be having a working model relating to how we achieve the objective, so that the lies being given to one is not a different lie being given to the other. If you do not have a situation where you work jointly, you may have a situation where those who have criminal intention or who have dubious intention may even talk about giving you different set of documents in order to achieve their objective. These are all issues where we need government collaboration. They need to work together, they need to have a shaking of hands, and they need to have a situation where they can manage this in the best interest of the country. This is very critical. Now, going further, relating to this, you now have a situation where the country wants to see the impact. You do not just talk about incentives in an abstract manner. You need to talk about incentives in terms of what is it really costing us. I'm going back to the cost-benefit analysis. What is it costing us? How many people have gotten the benefit of this incentive relating to the cost implication to us?
Let's take this break. All right, thank you very much there, Additional Adebayo. We'll return to you in the course of the program. We're taking a short break now. When we, of course, return from that short break, we'll take the tweets we have and then engage the guests in the Abuja studios.
An invincible Louis the Mosquito, responsible for 200 malaria cases all on its own. Is there anything that can kill Louis? Morphine! Presenting Mortise Power Guard. Its powerful formula kills malaria mosquitoes fast. So, get Mortise Power Guard.
Chief. Good morning, sir. You are here already?
No. Now my spirit day, my body day for house. What kind of question is that? Were you not the one that fixed this meeting for 8 a.m.? You are now coming by 10 a.m. and start asking me jab questions.
But Chief, now, I'm sorry. Don't you also go late for meetings sometimes? You know now, African time.
No more African time. And no more pancaking of face during office hours. At the end of the day, we will lose valuable time. We will not make progress. If we want to move this nation forward, we must treat business as business and respect time. Change begins with me.
Thank you, sir. I am sorry. Can we go for the meeting now, Chief?
Better.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Well, thank you for staying with us up to this moment on this Monday's edition of Good Morning Nigeria. Now, we are going to the tweets as they have been sent in by our curious viewers. And we'll begin with Omobolaho Babs. He says, first thing first, a tax reform is germane. We run a haphazard tax system where the poor pay more than the rich. We have tax system where multinationals avoid tax. We run a tax system that is regressive in nature. We must not be carried away with the frenzy of over 5 trillion naira made by FIRS.
Festus Akimboyewa has this tweet. Now, our economy needs a robust tax system that can respond to the pressures on public finances and the funding of capital expenditure, especially now that government is recording trillions of naira in budget deficit. Millions of Nigerians, especially self-employed ones, are not paying tax.
All right, Chris Simeon, tax evasion and avoidance have become alarming nowadays. Government should create appropriate measures to tackle it. Good morning, Nigeria.
Sonny Michael Amakoje. Now, even as we talk of problems of double taxation, some of the taxes collected end up in private pockets because the method of collection is difficult to monitor. Good examples are those revenue officers in our local markets. They issue personal receipts.
All right, and I have a Stephen Peter. As the adage goes, seeing is believing. If the tax starts working effectively, this tax system will improve dynamically. Let's do the talk. There is the need for the tax authorities to cultivate the cooperation of the professional bodies connected with tax matters. That's the external auditors and corporate tax consultants, to minimize the current level of abuses in tax returns. In doing this, more revenue for government. A progressive tax system should be the priority, where high-income earners pay higher and their income increase, vice versa.
Joseph has this tweet: improvement in taxes will surely enhance the government revenues at all levels. Nigerians are law-abiding citizens. It is corruption that turns some of them to be lawless.
Mohammed Mustafa, how many months do tax authority give as incentives before a company is liable to pay? Also, we talked about 3 years or more.
That's right. That's if you have, it depends on the kind of tax relief that you have. Yes. El Farouk Ahmad tweets: if we want to improve the tax system, especially for the small business persons and small-scale farmers, government should come out with a new system of collecting the tax, such as getting the data of those potential taxpayers and then getting them to also pay their taxes through banks, handset applications, etc. Because the tax officers who are walking about in town collecting levies in shops and markets, those levies are not reaching government account because it is manual and not auto. That's to say in terms of collection. So let us modernize it, and hopefully we get more revenue.
All right.
There's something I want to also, just you and I to check that so that they can also respond. In some jurisdictions, where we keep talking about housing deficit in Nigeria, millions of housing deficit, and so on and so forth. We know how we acquire accommodation in the country. But in some jurisdictions, taxpayers get reliefs for home improvements.
Exactly.
Now, do we have such a system here in Nigeria? I've not studied that aspect. Alternatively, to bridge the housing deficit gap, housing gap that we have in Nigeria, could taxpayers be incentivized going forward? I mean, mortgages are difficult to come by. I mean, you're all struggling to go and buy your block and buy your iron rod. You are quarreling with iron bender and all kinds of persons on site.
I would say that while I was in England, for example, there was one of these my friends that was from all these Arab countries. And it was speaking like when you get to a particular age, you are given a house. It's automatic, which doesn't apply here in Nigeria. And the honest truth is that we have the same oil, And if you look at, there's been a recent executive order which is still yet to be implemented. And that is when individuals purchase houses, it still attracts VAT. And depending on the prices of these houses, a lot of individuals that purchase houses these days are complaining bitterly about this rates, because they feel as if the government has not provided them with house, they have not provided them with funds to purchase this house, and at the same time, you now want to tax me. You want me to pay VAT on these houses, So it's a very difficult challenge, for individuals in Nigeria, with respect to housing, and also even access to mortgage, for example. How easy is it to access this mortgage? I remember a client as well who wanted to get a mortgage at some point in time. And when he visited one of these mortgage houses, he came back with a very sad face, because he just discovered that it was practically impossible for him to access those funds. So these are times for us to start, whereas we have incentives for certain companies that deal in real estate as well. You know, so these are the things we need to check to see if really these companies that are in real estate too are delivering on the incentives that are actually given to them. And we also need to create a proper structure in order to ensure that Nigerians are able to access housing finance. You know, it's very important we do that.
Yeah. And these estate surveyors, estate developers, you know, they don't just get. In fact, what they get could be more than just a tax incentive, because they have land. They're given land at a very cheap rate, and they're also funded by banks. You know, so they're enjoying a lot of incentive. Well, gentlemen, let's talk about individual tax incentive, which is very prominent. And it has to link with what Chris said earlier, or raised, you know, which has to do with the provision of housing, right? How can individuals access incentive when it comes to the tax incentive? Because we're talking about companies, you know, and corporate bodies. What about individuals? And they say that it's very prominent when it comes to, you know, incentivizing, you know, the society. Now, there's another thing, and that is the issue of is there any disparity between pseudo incentives, if you like, such as tax holiday, tax deduction, abatement, from tax incentive? Is it the same, or are there any you know, differences? Because some people think that because incentives are to spur economic activities, you know, therefore they take it to be a relative change in tax policy.
Okay, so yeah, so eventually for individuals now, and that's where you go back to the tax to service agreement. That's just one aspect you can actually, you know, incentivize individuals. But on the aspect of whether on mortgage, those are very critical, I mean, yeah, very technical aspect that people do not really know much about, you know. And then those kind of facilities are always not there, because for mortgage is basically it's usually commercial, if you ask me, you know, and then the profit is always what's the watchword for those managers. So eventually, if you as an individual, you must have some kind of facility that will enable you access those kinds of mortgage. Say you're working in a place where you don't even earn up to 200,000, you will not even access those kinds of facilities. But coming back to individual incentive, you need to, you know, be able to access it, you know, in terms of tax to service agreement. Otherwise, most of the times it's not there. So basically, it also boils down to those who negotiate for taxes. You know, like the FRS or Ministry of Finance. There are individuals who negotiate these taxes, and it also depends on the skills of those individuals to be able to negotiate properly, you know, what exactly they want to gain out of that kind of negotiation. But for us as individuals, it's almost not there eventually, you know, it's almost absent, except if you go to banks and maybe want to, you know, yeah, exactly. So for individuals, those facilities are always not there.
Yeah, Henry, I'm sorry to take us back to this, Kiriam. This is still in the range of individual incentives. I said mortgage. Mortgages are virtually absent in Nigeria in terms of, you know, you having to use that mortgage facility as a secure credit for you to acquire your own property. But we know that if you look around any Nigerian city in the past 20 years or more, you have seen the skyline has changed. People are building. As we are here now, I'm sure people are rushing to site, you know, even when the rain is falling, to go and do one work or the other. Is it possible for persons who are constructing outside of the mortgage system for them to get some relief? Because if you're in a place like Lagos, for instance, by the time that house is ready, you will pay land use charge. Is it possible for government, therefore, to incentivize persons who are engaged in construction, and then you have proof to show that, first of all, I mean, you have a title, you know, although if you go and build on another person's land, that's the cost, the loss will eventually be yours. Once you are engaged in construction, you know how many years it will take us here. A mortgage is usually max 30 years, but if you are constructing, it will take you a few years. Somebody is building 1 3-bedroom bungalow. I'm doing this quietly, you know, can the person be getting relief, you know, as personal incentive, so as to, you know, at the end of the day, you know, help shut that up?
I think the best way to do that is basically you deal with the land first. How can people have access to land easily and at a very cheap rate? You know, when you do that, you ordinarily would have given incentive for even acquiring the land in the first place. Then you now look at incentives for the materials to build. Like, for example, the block industry, what can you do for them in order to ensure the blocks are cheaper for people to have access to it? What about the cement industry as well?
Wait, block. Sorry, we are talking block. You see, Kira, the block, when you go to mine the sand for block, sharp sand, they will tax you there.
True.
Where you sound like you're laughing, isn't it?
At every stage you are taxed.
You are taxed.
know that about that.
But that's the best approach. For cement, for example, that's one of the most expensive resources in building. You know, if you can grant incentive to maybe the people in that industry, for example, and make this thing cheaper, it will be easily accessible.
What about the roads?
Well,
16 mm.
there's incentives for people in steel as well. You know, so those are the easy way it could trickle down. But if you start looking at an instance when an individual is going to actually get those incentives, it might be practically impossible.
But if individual incentive is prominent, right? Why is it lacking? Why is it at a zero ebb in Nigeria?
It's not exactly at zero ebb, if you ask me, because a lot of these insurance companies, you know, approach companies to say, like organizations, to say, okay, how many staff do you have? Can they access our mortgage facility? And then use that, you know, to drop their tax liability in a way. So like we have been approached a lot of times, and then, you know, they'll ask, okay, fine, are you interested? They'll come to lecture you on the facilities available, and then how much tax it to help you drop. For example, those are direct incentives, if you ask me. So for example, say you're paying 50K per month in terms of your tax, depending on what your salary is. So, you know, so those kinds of mortgage, if you can access them, it drops your tax to some rate, maybe to like 30K. You know, so those are some. There's a way accountants do it anyway. I'm not an accountant, so yeah. So they try to help you use those kind of facilities to drop your taxes. So those are some direct ways of assessing tax. Yeah.
All right, Henry Uche, would like to thank you very much. You are the Public-Private Sector Transparency Accountability Officer of Oxfam in Nigeria. Thank you very much for contributing to our discussion this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciation also to Oluwaseun Kadri, legal practitioner and tax expert. Thanks a lot for being around.
Thank you very much.
Saleh Abubakar, another tax consultant and ICT consultant as well. Thanks a lot for being with us in Good Morning Nigeria.
Thanks for having me as well.
From Lagos, we were joined by Adesina Adebayo, who is Vice President, Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria. Mr. Adebayo, thank you very much also for being part of our discussion this morning. Okay, so that does it for our conversation. Let's go on now to our complimentary segments, and here is sports.
In the first professional meeting of 2016 Olympic